Every once in a while, the world of rock gets one of those ultra-charismatic individuals. And I think you know the kind I mean, the sort that attracts attention from everyone, even from people who profess to hate them. There's just something about what they do, both on and off stage, that draws people to them. In other words, they are a bona fide star. The greatest of these performers recognize this and parlay their notoriety into something truly awesome. They become icons, larger-than-life figures who become permanent fixtures in pop culture. Morrissey remains one of the most fascinating characters rock has ever produced. More than 2 decades after we first began to hear of him, he still commands attention and fascination. Millions love him, and millions also hate him. On top of that, he's one of the most enigmatic and mysterious figures ever produced by alternative rock. People have been trying to separate the facts from the myth and the fiction since the early 1980s. If you know of Morrissey already, you know what I mean. But if you're not really aware of this guy, chances are you've at least heard his name or seen his picture in a magazine. I mean, what's the deal with this guy? Everything about him seems to raise more questions than answers. Well, for the next hour, we're going to look at the biggest of these questions, and this is really, really rare. We are going to try and get Morrissey to explain himself. The name of this show is The 7 Mysteries of Morrissey.
Now, the ongoing history of new music.
I don't feel as if I'm coming back, because I haven't been anywhere. But I'm told that many people might be coming back to me. He said, laughing nervously.
Punctured bicycle on a hillside desolate. Will nature make a man of me, yeah? When in this charming car, this charming man, why pamper life's complexity when the leather runs smooth on the passenger seat? I would go out tonight, but I haven't got a stitch to wear. This man said it's gruesome that someone so handsome should care. A jumped up pantry boy who never knew his place. He said, return the ring. We know so much about these things. We know so much about these things. I would go out tonight, but I haven't got a stitch to wear. This man said it's gruesome that someone so handsome should care. Na, 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 na. This charming man. Na, 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 na. This charming man. A jumped up country boy who never knew his place. He said, return the ring. We know so much about these things. We know so much about these things. We know so much about these things.
Welcome to the show. I'm Alan Cross, and this program is about one of the most loved, loathed, quotable, charismatic, maddening, outspoken, and influential figures in the history of modern rock. The guy is also very secretive and protective. When it comes to answering questions about himself, he is very, very careful to preserve an aura of mystery. Maybe it's all about privacy, or maybe he just loves to keep fans and critics guessing. Regardless, we're going to do our best to penetrate the Morrissey mystery from 7 different angles. And the first question is, Who is Morrissey? I mean, really. His full name is Stephen Patrick Morrissey. He was born of Irish roots on May 22, 1959 in Manchester. By the time he was 15, he was a rabid music fan and often wrote letters to the various British music magazines praising bands like the New York Dolls and Sparks. He was also a hardcore Sex Pistols fan. Through the late 70s, he worked as a tax clerk, making about £22 a week, and dreamed of moving to the United States. There's also a story that he worked as a hospital orderly, where his contact with blood turned him into a hardcore vegetarian. Another story suggests that Morrissey's vegetarianism began in 1973, when McDonald's opened their first restaurant in Manchester. He was also in and out of several bands, with names like the CJs, Sulky Young, and the T-Shirts. He was also briefly a member of a group called the Nosebleeds, which featured a young guitarist named Billy Duffy, who would later go on to be in The Cult. Then, in early 1982, Morrissey met up with a guitarist named Johnny Marr, and this was the beginning of The Smiths. Now, today, the Smiths' influence can be found in everyone from Oasis to Radiohead to just about any emo band in existence. Culturally, well, we'll come back to that a little later. First, let's hear something. This is the best known of all Smiths songs. It's How Soon Is Now.
The sun and the air of a shyness that is criminally vulgar. I am the sun and air of nothing in particular. You should know, how can you say I go about things the wrong way? I am human and I need to belong, just like everybody else does. That is criminally vulgar. I am the sun and air of nothing in particular. You should know, how can you say I go about things the wrong way? I am human and I need to belong, just like everybody else does.
After an astounding and highly hyped 5-year run, the Smiths broke up in spectacular fashion in the fall of 1987, sending fans all over the world into deep, deep mourning. One person who cried for hours after hearing the news was a failed secretary named Joanne, who was an ultra-hardcore fan. But don't feel bad for Joanne, because many of the life lessons she learned thanks to Morrissey and the Smiths were eventually channeled into her attempts to become a writer. And she's done all right. Maybe you've heard of her. Joanne Kathleen Rowlings? J.K. Rowlings, the creator of Harry Potter? After the breakup, Morrissey went solo and continued to add to the legend, especially in the late 80s and early 90s. He released a series of solo albums, some good, some not so good, but to his ultra-loyal fan base, he maintained godlike status. Morrissey and Every Day is Like Sunday from his 1988 debut solo album, Viva Hate. Over the next 10 years, Morrissey released 6 studio albums and 1 live album along with a bunch of videos. He also toured the world just enough to keep his fan base happy. And that's the short answer to Morrissey Mystery Number 1. Who exactly is this guy? He's the ex-singer of the biggest British indie band of the 1980s and an enduring alt-rock icon. Mystery Number 2 is something diehards asked for years. What happened to him in the late 90s? After a 1997 album called Maladjusted, he seemed to... he just vanished off the face of the earth. Here's the story. In 1996, both Morrissey and Johnny Marr became embroiled in an ugly legal battle with their ex-mates from the Smiths over royalty payments. At about the same time, Morrissey moved to Los Angeles. Now, officially, he was tired of his English fame and simply wanted to live anonymously in Southern California. A more conspiratorial reason might be that he wanted to get his assets and business dealings out of the UK so they wouldn't be touched if any judgment went against him. That turned out to be a really wise decision, because when he did lose the case and moves were made to seize his property, Morrissey was safe. Anything left behind in England was registered under the names of other people and thus untouchable. But let's hear Morrissey's side of the story.
So, can we catch up? Where have you been for the last 6 or 7 years?
I've been on Earth, and I've been roaming the Earth, and I've been very busy, and I haven't recorded. So I think that's why you ask the question, is it not? I've been touring, and even nipped into Toronto occasionally, and always had fantastic nights there. But 7 years without an album, and with no label. So let's just say I've been floating around.
So you must have been the most famous person in rock not to have a deal.
Yes, well, lots of people were aghast and didn't quite believe me and thought I was being stroppy, and people would say to me, well, surely you can just stroll in anywhere and demand something, and it wasn't true. I think the music industry changed dramatically over recent years, and there was a very obvious shift to very, very disposable, shall we call it talent, for want of a better word. And I think record companies weren't interested in hiding the fact that they just wanted to make quick money with quick artists who would come and go and blah, 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 da-da-da-da. And amazingly, I wasn't considered to be one of those artists.
Mercury Records wasn't exactly a great place to be for a lot of artists.
It was quite terrible. I was only there for a few months, because once I signed, and I immediately released an album, and they collapsed and everybody was kicked out. So I was pleased about that, because many artists who were on the label had made albums and they were booted out and they weren't allowed to take their album with them. So at least through the grace of God or somebody, I actually had released my album.
So with no way to express yourself, with no way to get your music out there, it must have driven you crazy over that period of time.
Well, not really. I've always been a bit crazy, and so life just continued, and I just confirmed all the frustrations I had about the jolly old music industry.
Irish blood, English heart, this I'm made of. There is no one on earth I'm afraid of, and no regime can buy or sell me. I've been dreaming of a time when to be English is not to be painful, to be standing by the flag, not feeling shameful, racist or partial,
Morrissey with Irish Blood, English Heart from his 2004 album You Are the Quarry. Now, these days, Morrissey lives in Hollywood, up in the Hollywood Hills, in a secluded house designed by Clark Gable for Carole Lombard back in the 1930s. Nancy Sinatra is one of his neighbors. Johnny Depp is another neighbor. And if you can find North Sweetser Avenue, which runs off Sunset Boulevard, you're basically in the right neighborhood. You can sometimes be spotted at the occasional rock show down on Sunset Boulevard, but the best place to look is a pub called the Cat and Fiddle on Sunday afternoons, where he likes to enjoy a pint or two. Oh, one other thing. As much as he likes living in America, he is disgusted at how they make tea in that country.
Have you found anybody that can make a decent pot of tea?
It's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult, and it's very stressful for somebody like me because I'm a teaaholic, and all establishments in America are dreadful when it comes to tea because they refuse to boil water.
And you just put a little bit of hot water in one of those awful little tin things.
Yes.
Drop a bag in it and expect that.
Yes. And you can place your entire hand in it, and it's
nothing.
Dreadful.
Morrissey is also still very heavily involved in various animal rights causes. Like we saw earlier, Morrissey's an outspoken vegetarian. His favorite causes these days include some highly effective but low-profile work with elephant welfare in Thailand. And he has a soft spot for Canadian baby seals.
It's really, really shaken everybody. And the people at PETA just cannot believe that after all this time, the Canadian government would allow this to happen. I mean, this is the lowest of the low. It's on par with, the atrocities in Iraq or whatever. And all the people who saw the footage in Canada were just totally appalled. And it's terribly, terribly sad. I mean, yes, all I can do is beg people not to wear fur, but intelligent people don't wear fur anyway. So there's a lot of people who aren't very intelligent who have to be reached. And PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, are just astonishing people. They go on and on and on every day all over the world. They're fearless. They have one goal in mind, defending animals all the time. And yes, they are completely biased. The animal must always be protected wherever it is. And the history of their successes are absolutely fantastic. You never hear about them, of course. I mean, the news would never report them. But as an organisation, they're just fantastic. And Canada is a target now because of this just appalling thing.
You won't, however, find Morrissey firebombing a McDonald's anytime soon, like his friend Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders.
No, Chrissy's been arrested many, many times, and she's been thrown in cells many, many times, and she can do that because she's a very tough woman and she's very committed. I'm somewhat frail, and I'm so upset by animal cruelty that I can't actually face it. I couldn't go into an abattoir and look around, where Chrissy just storms in and she's ready to jump on people's backs. I can't do that because I get so upset by what I see. So I haven't really got it in me to get out there and smash windows and so forth. But I do what I can.
This is the title track of the Smiths' second album, Meat is Murder.
be human crime. Closer comes the screaming night. This beautiful creature must die. This beautiful creature must die. A death for no reason, and death for no reason is murder. And the flesh you so fancifully fry is not succulent, tasty or kind. It's death for no reason, and death for no reason is murder. And the carp that you carve with a smile, it is murder. And the turkey you forcibly slice, it is murder. Do you know how animals die? Kitchener Road, very humbly.
The Smiths, featuring Morrissey from 1985. And there are two mysteries solved, more or less. Who he is, and what became of him in the late 1990s. In a moment, we'll look at two more things. Why people love Morrissey, and why people hate him. Hang tough.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
Welcome back. I'm Alan Cross, and this episode is called The 7 Mysteries of Morrissey. Mystery number 3 is, why do people revere this guy so much? Although his peak of popularity, worldwide anyway, was back in the 1980s and early 1990s, Morrissey continues to cast a long shadow over almost everything to do with alternative rock. As the Smiths' lead singer and lyricist, Morrissey became one of the most important and influential British performers of the 1980s, and several things set him and the band apart. Number 1, when it looked like synthesizers and keyboards were going to be the death of guitars, the Smiths specialized in a guitar-based, jangly sort of pop. They sounded incredibly different from the status quo at the time. Number 2, the Smiths were unbelievably prolific. They were together for just 5 years, but they released a ton of stuff. In the first 2 years the band was together, they issued 7 singles and 3 albums, and they were always in the news. Number 3, Morrissey's lyrics were a powerful mix of wit and emotion that appealed to sensitive and miserable souls. In fact, a new noun was created just for him. Morrissey is still described as being a miserablist. If your headspace left you so inclined, you could spend hours studying his lyrics and find all kinds of obsessions and references and revelations, and perhaps identify with them body and soul. For the typical Smiths fan, Morrissey spoke to you in a way that no one else could. No one sang of the things that Morrissey did. There's a reason why there's a book on the Smiths called Songs That Saved Your Life. The Smiths were the darlings of the British college crowd of the early and middle 80s. If you were a student in Britain at that time, chances are that the Smiths were your band. And these fans helped make the Smiths household names across the UK. In North America, it was a little different. People had no idea what Morrissey was talking about when he used words like moors or vicars, and didn't understand any references to the national health system. These references were just so English that they were foreign. Consequently, they were never mainstream in these parts. The Smiths were, however, a major cult band. To be Canadian or American and into the Smiths was like being part of some special secret society. And if you were around back then, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Let me show you what I mean. This is a recording of a radio interview Morrissey did in Los Angeles. And this caller was phoning in to talk to her idol. And, just roll the tape.
This is Miriam from Altadena.
Okay, Miriam, you're on the air. Talk to Morrissey.
Oh my God, Morrissey, you're like so special, and your songs just like speak to me, you know. And everybody wonders why I like you so much. I mean, not everybody, but like kids my own age, because I'm like 13, and everybody's listening to like New Kids on the Block stuff and wearing those stupid shiny black shoes. And it's just, I don't know, it's just you're so special, and you're like the best singer ever. And I almost wanted to go to. I almost got to your concert. I was so mad when I didn't get to it, and when it sold out in 20 minutes, I felt like, oh God, you're so special. I'm
I think she's okay. I think. And here's point number 4 about the Smiths' appeal and notoriety. From the outset, Morrissey emerged as an incredibly charismatic character. On stage, he had this aura unlike anything British music fans had seen in years. And in print, he was always good for a quote. No one was safe. Politicians, the monarchy, meat-eaters, fellow musicians, even himself. Perhaps I'm unique because people are so dull. I'm not very good at being dull, he once said. Here's another. The only thing that could possibly save British politics would be Margaret Thatcher's assassin. That quote made him the subject of a police investigation for allegedly attempting to incite a bloody coup. He was so good with the sound bites that they filled a book. And I'm not kidding. There's a book called The Smiths in Quotes, and it's filled with Morrisseyisms. He's also prominently featured in several other books of rock quotes. The man was and remains a soundbite machine.
Sweetness, sweetness, I was only joking when I said I'd like to mash every tooth in your head. Oh, sweetness, sweetness, I was only joking when I said by right you should be bludgeoned in your bed. And now I know how Joan of Arc felt. Now I know how Joan of Arc felt. As the flames rose to her Roman nose and her Walkman started to melt.
Morrissey's appeal just doesn't extend to depressed college students. These days, his fastest-growing group of fans are Latinos, especially Mexicans.
To what do you owe that huge Latino followership?
It's something I can't really explain. I have no idea. People tell me it's because, for the most part, they feel like outsiders. And certainly in this country, they feel as if they're being pushed out and they somehow don't belong. And they hear that in the songs I sing. The past with the Smiths, I think, is musically fantastic. And I think it was just, for me, it was perfect. And I think the songs live on. It hasn't dated, it hasn't aged. If anything, it becomes more interesting and intriguing. It's interesting that a group like that could have existed and could have broken through.
At that time, when everybody was playing synthesizers?
Absolutely, and it was all about money, and the Smiths never had any promotion and never had any money. So we were always there by default, and despite massive discouragement. So I think the songs are really fantastic and continue to be so. I was scared to death when I was 16. Now I feel fine.
But now you're offering comfort and some sort of articulation for the people who are 16 now.
Well, I don't know how. I mean, people always tell me that the thing I do has a very strong adolescent yearning tinge to it, but I can't see how, since I'm not adolescent. Is there an explanation?
I don't know.
Maybe I'm just...
And there's a quick summary of why millions of people love Morrissey. But let's just say that there are those who don't share that opinion. Just about everything about Morrissey tends to really polarize people in their assessment of his music, what he does, and what he says. Mystery number 4 is why some people hate him so much. Actually, people loathe him for exactly the same reasons others love him. A quick example. These are the Meatmen with this classic from 1996. It's called Morrissey Must Die. The Meatmen with Morrissey Must Die. 3 more mysteries when we return. What's the deal with the Flowers? Will the Smiths ever reunite? And the big one. You know what I'm talking about. The one that has to do with sexuality.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
Welcome back to 7 Mysteries About Morrissey. I'm Alan Cross, and we have 3 to go. Number 5. What's the deal with the Flowers? If you've ever been to a Smiths or a Morrissey show, or if you've ever seen footage or pictures of one, you've seen flowers all over the stage. What's the deal? Flowers became a staple at Smiths shows beginning on February 4th, 1983, when they played a show in Manchester. The Flowers have a significance, Morrissey said. When we first began, there was a horrendous sterile cloud over the music scene in Manchester, and everyone was anti-human, and it was very, very cold. The Flowers were a very human gesture. They intimated harmony with nature, something people seemed to be very terribly afraid of. The Flowers offered hope. It also created an interesting atmosphere, because instead of beer and smokes, Smiths and Morrissey gigs smelled fresh and flowery. At first it was daffodils, and then they moved to gladioli.
I was trying to express something about purity and crashing through the horrible greyness of rock venues. And there was a faint link to wildisms. And people now still bring flowers. And although I haven't used them for years and years and years, it's quite nice.
Do you appreciate the flowers?
Oh, yes. Absolutely, yes.
Panic on the streets of London, panic on the streets of Birmingham. I wonder to myself, could life ever be sane again? The League side streets that you slipped down. rocks may rise and the grass may, but honey pie, you're not safe here, so you run down to the safety of the town. But there's panic on the streets of Carlisle, Dublin, Dundee, Humberside. I wonder to myself, burn down the disco, hang the blessed DJ, because the music that they constantly play, it says nothing to me about my life. Hang the blessed DJ, because the music they constantly play. On the lead side street you just slip down, the provincial towns you jog round. Hang the DJ, 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 hang the DJ.
Will the Smiths ever get back together? Well, it almost happened a couple of times. There were several gatherings in the early 1990s that almost resulted in a farewell concert. Then came the acrimonious £1.2 million lawsuit in the late 1990s that Morrissey is still challenging. There are still some very hard feelings over that. And then there's Morrissey's side of the story.
Never.
Never.
No.
Because ABBA just turned down $1 billion. $1 billion.
Really?
To do a world tour. And they said no.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I think certainly the music of the Smiths has stood the test of time, when so much music from that period is totally forgotten. Even though, you know, it could have sold billions upon billions. I think the Smiths were very, very meaningful and very sincere, and the dust really does settle, and a certain degree of justice occurs, and that's rare.
Good times for a change. See, the luck I've had can make a good man turn bad. So please, 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 let me get what I want this time. Haven't had a dream in a long time. See, the life I've had can make a good man bad. So for once in my life, let me get what I want. Lord knows it would be the first time. Lord knows it would be the first time.
And now, the final Morrissey mystery. What exactly is the man's sexual orientation? Now, the reason there's a fascination with this question is because he's been so evasive about it, even though there is gay imagery throughout the music of the Smiths, as well as Morrissey's own material. By the way, the Smiths were originally conceived as a gay band. Their first single was supposed to be a cover of a 1963 song by a group called I Want a Boy for My Birthday. Later, when Rolling Stone magazine tried to ask the question, Morrissey became very annoyed. "I think the mission of most journalists is to expose me. People are ready and wait for the cloak to drop and to see me photographed in the Playboy Club." Morrissey has also expressed much admiration for an obscure American singer from the early 1970s named Joe Bryant. And Joe Bryant was the first openly gay rock singer. So, is he gay? I don't know. Hopefully in an enlightened world, it doesn't matter. On his 2004 album, You Are the Quarry, he has a song called All You Lazy Dykes. Have a listen.
Well, it really is simply a pop song, and it's a cry to a woman who is in a conventional marriage, but she really shouldn't be. She should be with the girls down at the bar on Santa Monica Boulevard. And she knows she should be there, and she just needs a slight calling and a slight push. And here I am to call and push.
Cross-armed at the palms, then legs astride their bikes, indigo burns on their arms. One sweet day, an emotional world, be good to yourself, and you'll come and join the girl. All the lazy dykes, they pity how you live. Just somebody's wife. And you give, and you give, and you give, give and you give. And one sweet day, an emotional world, you will be good to yourself, and you'll come and join the girls. Touch me, squeeze me, hold me too tightly. And when you look at me, you actually see me. And I never felt so alive in the whole of my life. In the whole of my life. Be yourself, be yourself. Come to the Palms and see yourself. And at last, your life begins. At last, your
Still with Morrissey's sexuality, others maintain that Morrissey is completely celibate. This could explain why he has never, ever been linked with any kind of a partner. Here's a quote from 1984. "I refuse to recognize the terms hetero, bi, and homosexual. Everyone has exactly the same sexual needs. People are just sexual. The prefix is immaterial." So it seems that Morrissey's seventh mystery shall remain just that. Back in a moment.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
I hope you found something useful in this program. If you're a fan of the Smiths and Morrissey, maybe some long-standing questions have been answered, or maybe you're just as confused by the man as you ever were. He's that kind of guy. If you're not a Smiths or Morrissey fan, maybe you now just have some kind of appreciation for why this guy was and is so fascinating to such a significant portion of the alt-rock audience. One thing is for sure. They don't make them much like this anymore. And you know what? That's really too bad. Technical production is by Rob Johnston and Andrew Leung. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to The Ongoing History of New Music. a Deep Sky production.